Hello everyone! It's tradition around here that whenever I do a Jane Eyre video, I have to follow that up with a monster movie review to maintain equilibrium. I was going to talk about an old kaiju film this week, but I decided I needed to put that project on the back burner for a while. So instead, let's take a gander at a movie that's been referred to as one of the worst ever made, 1953's Robot Monster. Aliens attack Earth and wipe out the entire population except for 8 people who manage to survive their cosmic rays. One alien agent, known as Roman, is sent down to the planet to eradicate these stragglers. I know a little about most of the contenders for worst movie ever made, but I somehow never heard anything about this one. Lucky me, I got to go into it knowing absolutely nothing, except for what the titular robot monster looked like, because I had seen pictures. The film was produced and directed by inexperienced filmmaker Phil Tucker, who shot it in just 4 days and spent about $16,000. Most of the money went toward filming it in 3D, which explains why the photography looks so good despite the cheap, amateurish production. I wouldn't call it one of the worst movies ever made. There are several films out there that are far more incompetent, or mind-numbingly boring, or both, which is a lethal combination. But don't get me wrong, it's not a good movie. It's bonkers, and it's confusing. The opening is straightforward enough. A couple kids are outside playing and come across a pair of scientists in a cave. Their mother and older sister come looking for the kids, and the family goes off to have a picnic. Okay so far. Then there's a bolt of lightning and a lot of flashes, and suddenly we see 2 gators wrestling each other, and we see dinosaurs fighting. What? After a minute of that, we go back to the kid, whose name is Johnny, and there are bubbles everywhere, emanating from a device the main title's called the Automatic Billion Bubble Machine. And then Roman the monster emerges from the cave, and while I won't call the movie the worst ever, the monster costume is another story. Roman is played by George Barrows in his own gorilla suit, with some fabric obscuring his face and a space helmet stuck on his head. Roman was supposed to be in a robot suit, but they couldn't afford one, so Tucker asked Barrows to step in. There are so many variations and alternatives they could have gone with. Why did they choose this one? Just think, Barrows came out wearing this ensemble, and somebody, probably a few somebodies, looked it over and said, good enough. And, you know, maybe it was a smart move in the long run, because had it been less ridiculous, we probably wouldn't be talking about it today. Johnny, the boy, watches as Roman communicates with his home base, and then he sneaks away to find his family. And this is the point where I started to feel like I was losing my mind, or maybe aliens had come into my house and abducted me 5 minutes into the movie, and then returned me to my living room 40 minutes later. Johnny finds his family waiting for him in a special shelter his dad and older sister have built, and they all know all about Roman and made this thing so he wouldn't find them. But hold on, Johnny doesn't have a dad, and isn't this father the older scientist that Johnny just met 5 minutes ago? And both the mother and the older sister, who's named Alice, are wearing halter tops now. Did they change clothes? Why did they change clothes? How much time has passed? And they're upset that everyone else on the planet is dead, even Roy, who was such a great scientist, and Alice is sad despite the fact they fought all the time. But who is Roy? Is he the younger scientist that she just met? When did all this happen? Where are we? It was at the 22-minute mark when Alice and Roy, who was not dead after all, started flirting, and my mom said, "What's their relationship? Are they not siblings?" That I stopped the tape so that we could compare notes on what we knew, or what we thought we knew, that we were now doubting. After 5 minutes of discussion, we were still confused, but at least we were on the same page, and we continued. I would love to say that everything got straightened out after that. It is a very funny movie, first and foremost because of Roman. The close-ups of him aren't anything to write home about. He can't emote with his face, so he has to resort to wild gestures. But I think the long shots are the ones that are really silly. There are several shots of him just walking around, and each time it gets funnier. When he gets frustrated, he looks like a crabby 5-year-old stomping around his backyard in his Halloween costume. But he has to go gingerly over rocks and roots and things, because if he moves too fast, he might topple over. His boss, called the Great Guidance, is also played by Barrows, and both are voiced by English actor John Brown, whose speech is far too sophisticated for this costume. The Great Guidance clearly doesn't think much of his flunky, and probably wants to fire him for his poor job performance, especially after Roman gets a good look at Alice. He goes from adamantly refusing to negotiate with the humans to saying that he will discuss it with her. Just her. Uh-oh, watch out, Alice. What's weird to me isn't that the movie dives into the cliche of the monster falling for the leading lady, but that all the characters are in the know. I expected them to be like, oh, Alice, be careful, this is dangerous, who knows if he can be reasoned with, who knows what he might do. But they seem to all just assume that she's going for a rendezvous. The little sister is like, is Alice going on a date with Roman? And Alice goes after Roy for being jealous and implying that she shouldn't degrade herself in order to save them. And she says, I know, there are some things that nice girls don't do. And I was like, what? So she has an idea of what's about to happen, and apparently everybody else does. Does Roman? But there are all kinds of outrageous lines of dialogue in this. The first one that made my mom and I go, whoa, was, you're so bossy you ought to be milked before you come home at night. And Johnny insults Roman by saying, you look like a pooped out pinwheel. I had to stop the movie again to ask my mom if I'd heard that correctly. The little girl, I can't decide if she's a bad actress or just perfect. She isn't that much younger than Johnny, but she seems to have no clue what is happening. And then we've got Alice and Roy, who hide from Roman in some bushes, and apparently the sight of her bare shoulders is too much for him, because he starts getting touchy, and all of a sudden it turns into a love scene from a Tarzan movie, all sign language and pointing and mouthing of words until they're overcome with attraction and it cuts away. Then it shows them sauntering back to the family in the next scene, and Dad asks, what have you two been doing? And Alice answers, oh, Father, isn't it obvious? Excuse me? I can't imagine it was meant to sound so salacious, but it does. It also doesn't help that they immediately halt everything so they can get married. They're in such a hurry that Roy doesn't even bother to put his shirt back on for the wedding. But Roman has been struck by Cupid's arrow, and after wandering around on the hot hills for what seems like an extraordinarily long time, he finally succeeds in abducting Alice, which leads to some more weird dialogue like, I must kill you with my hands, and how is it you're so strong, Roman? Roman does get handsy and aggressive at one point, and once again, my mom and I looked at each other like, whoa, what are you doing, movie? This is 1953, it's science fiction featuring little kids. You can't go there. Then suddenly Roman has an epiphany and realizes he wants to be human too, so that he can laugh and feel and think independently, but mostly so that he can mate with Alice. He's commanded to kill her, but resists the order, leading to the most famous lines, I cannot, yet I must yet I cannot. He delivers a powerful philosophical monologue. It's right up there with Shakespeare's, if you prick us, do we not bleed? Now let me interrupt to issue a spoiler warning. If you have plans to watch the movie yourself and you don't want to hear how it ends, you probably want to skip the next couple minutes. The end is a short burst of chaos. Roman kills young Johnny, only to be killed by his boss, who takes the obliteration of planet Earth into his own paws. Lightning strikes again, and the stock footage of dinosaurs and gators fighting comes back, and I assure you it doesn't make any more sense the second time around. And then, at last, the movie reveals it was all a dream. Johnny got hit on the head and imagined the whole thing while he was unconscious. I did wonder early on if this might turn out to be the case. Halfway down my second page of notes, I wrote, I don't think you will be able to see it, I wrote, "Is this all a dream the kid is having?" I would show it to you, but I realized that I was writing so fast that I wrote drem instead of dream, and that's embarrassing. But it really does say that. But when we got the scenes of Alice and Roy canoodling in the bushes, I was like, no, the kid wouldn't be dreaming about that, right? And then I thought some more, and, you know, if you reevaluate everything through the lens of a child's immature perspective, the crazy stuff does make a little more sense. The way he has a nice interaction with an older man and then just imagines him as his dad. The way he pairs his sister up with the young scientist he meets just because they're close in age. The way Alice and Roy completely forget about the dangerous situation they're in and start being silly with each other. The bizarre simplicity of the Roman costume, which incorporates the same kind of helmet Johnny was wearing. And the fact there's a bubble machine going through the whole movie. Kids love bubble machines. I'm not saying this is like Wizard of Oz level creativity, and once you find out what happened, it's like, it all makes so much more sense now. No. But I think I can understand what they were going for. There's some psychology that clicks, I guess. Either this was all intentional and there is something kind of clever about it, or it was all just kind of haphazard and I have come up with a whole bunch of excuses that explain the insane things that happen in this movie. It's still disturbing, though, that he dreamt of his own murder and also dreamt about a strange young man and a robot monkey getting all hot and bothered about his grown-up sister. The twist ending was a very late addition, but they weren't fully committed to it, since the last shot shows the robot monster emerging from the cave again, and again, and again, as if to say, yeah, it was all a dream. Or was it? My mom and I both found this movie surprisingly entertaining. When you sit down to watch a bad movie, a notoriously bad movie, you always hope that it'll either be better than you were led to expect, or so hilariously awkward and awful that it slingshots around the sun and becomes good. It doesn't always work out that way. Some bad movies are just mediocre and forgettable, and that's the end of it. That's not the case with Robot Monster. This movie is fun and funny and bizarre with so many strange choices and such an abrupt tonal shift. It does have surprising positives like the clarity of the picture and the quality of the score. The music was written by none other than Elmer Bernstein during a low point in his career before he found huge success with scores for The Great Escape, The Magnificent Seven, and To Kill a Mockingbird, to name a few. But ultimately, it is the clunkiness and the awkwardness and the crazy choices that make it so entertaining. The costume and the bubbles are gifts that keep on giving. But even when Roman is not on screen, the dialogue is so wackadoodle that the movie's never boring. It's absolutely nuts, but it's a good time. And those are my thoughts on Robot Monster. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have seen this film, I would love to hear your take on it, so go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll be back next time. Thanks for watching.